I've been asked to give a brief introduction to who we are as an organisation. Some of you may be well aware of CCS, and others we may be entirely new to you. We're a charity that works across Somerset. We were established in 1926, and we call ourselves CCS, but our full name is the Community Council for Somerset. And just to make it clear, we're not a council. I think back in the 20s, a council was a name for people gathering together to agree and make plans, and that's where the word council comes from. But we're a charity, and we work across Somerset, working with individuals and communities to make our communities good places to live and work and grow up. And we that work changes over time as different needs and are apparent, and we're able to address different projects, so do different work to address these needs. So that's who we are as an organisation. And to do that, we have a wide range of projects working with different parts of our communities. And there's a list here of the things that we do, and that ranges from the village agent work, which is working with vulnerable individuals across our communities, to our work with community buildings, to the work with diverse ethnic communities across Somerset. And now we have this project working on affordable rural housing, which fits very well within our remit. Next slide, please. Okay, so to introduce our team tonight, so there's myself, there's Jane Birch. I'm the head of programmes at CCS, and so I oversee the range of programmes that we deliver across the county. And we've also got Colin MacDonald, who is our senior housing enabler. Colin, do you want to give a little wave? Here we go. And then we have Carrie Korf. Little wave from Carrie. Carrie is one of our senior community advisors. And Steve Grice. Little wave. There we go. That is the team who are delivering this programme across Somerset. And there'll be I'm purely doing the introduction and helping later on with the panel, but they'll be delivering this webinar for you. And then there's a few pieces of housekeeping to let you know about. We've talked about the webinars being recorded. It'd be really helpful if you could put your name and your role in your organisation, your role and your organisation in the chat. And if you're happy to share it with the others attending this evening, your email address. Because there's quite a few people and there's a lot to get through, we thought that might be better than asking everybody to go around and give that information verbally. So if you're happy to do that, that would be really, really helpful. And I think that's it on the housekeeping, but there's going to be a time for questions. So if you don't mind keeping your questions till that time, that would be really helpful. But I will now hand you over to Carrie.
Thank you, Jane. That's wonderful. So firstly, in this session, we're going to cover the need for affordable rural housing and who it's for and how we can identify the need locally. We're going to be looking at rural exception sites and looking at where you can build. And we're going to be talking about the process and who is involved. And so we're here to help through the Rural Housing Enablement Programme. So Somerset is part of a national programme that's run through ACRE, the Action with Communities in Rural England. And DEFRA provided funding for just 12 months for rural housing enablers in each county. And obviously we're hoping that will be sustained. But essentially we're here, the enablers have been in place to map the current level of rural housing development, what's in the pipeline, and to look at the need and where the opportunities are, and to support communities, if needed, to navigate the planning journey. So we as a team are here to offer the independent support and advice. Colin's leading on the programme. Steve and I are here to help too as the community advisors. We are currently developing guidelines and resources that will go on our website as we progress. And we've been looking at where there is the greatest need and the potential for rural housing at the parish level. So now we're ready to offer support to parish councils and to community groups at whatever stage of the journey you are at. So in terms of housing needs surveys, these obviously provide evidence for the kind of tenure, the numbers of homes and the size of homes, and are an essential part of the process, but we're going to be talking about that. And essentially we've been drawing together a strong Somerset advisory group, which is being made up of key players, including Homes England and Somerset Council. And we also have representatives from housing associations and community land trusts who have delivered in the past to bring their experience to the picture. And parish council representatives are being invited too. And Becky Winter from Housing Justice has joined the advisory group, which is great. She's also here today. And she covers the Diocese of Bath and Wells. So a great group to get together. And we're so pleased that so many key partners want to work together, collaborate, and really understand the challenges for all involved so that we can work through those practical issues and work more strategically to ease some of the planning complexities. So, as mentioned, we're covering why there's such a need for affordable rural housing in Somerset, and we're helping you consider the steps and the stages, especially in identifying the need. And really, we're looking at the things that are helpful to consider when you're looking for sites to build on. And as Jane mentioned, there's going to be an opportunity to ask questions. So, why do we need affordable rural housing? Well, on an individual level, we all need a home. And shelter was identified by Maslow as one of the basic needs, like food and water. And we need shelter to achieve anything really. Without a home, it's difficult to maintain a job, difficult to function, difficult to maintain family relationships, your health. And we know that homelessness is rising in rural areas, partly due to housing benefit levels not keeping pace with the cost of renting on the private market, but there are other reasons. And so people are being forced out of the countryside because of the lack of affordable housing. And the impact on communities is huge. We need affordable rural housing to create resilient and sustainable communities. Otherwise, there's a real danger that villages become enclaves of older, wealthier residents who really struggle to get the services they need and the support. And if younger people and people with families move out of the area because of the lack of or the cost of housing, then local business suffers because they can't retain or attract employees, and those people aren't there to use those facilities and services. So what happens is school numbers drop, and we really need those families and local connections to be maintained to create those inclusive, diverse communities with a wide demographic to help them become sustainable. But let's talk to, or let's hear from Andrew in Taddington, who's a tenant himself. He really tells a good little story. It's a very short video.
Hi, my name's Andrew, and last year I was able to move into one of the new build houses in Taddington by the Peak District Rural Housing Association. I'm a fifth generation farmer here in Blackwell, which is the neighbouring village to Taddington. Being a farmer with livestock, it's important to stay close by for looking after the livestock. I've grown up round Taddington my whole life, went to school in Taddington. The whole family lives in the local area, so I was really looking to stay close anyway, stay local rather than moving away. So when the new build houses came in Taddington, it was at the ideal time when me and my girlfriend were looking to move into our first house together, and so we were lucky enough to get one of the new houses. Local houses around here are very expensive, so usually too expensive to buy as a first home, and often they don't come up for rent. So being able to rent one of the local houses at an affordable price was great.
Thank you. So we will be hearing from a Somerset tenant later on, but that's very useful to hear from that tenant because it really says it simply and directly. So Now I'm going to hand over to Steve to talk about the Somerset picture. Oh.
Hello there. We're sorry about we have been having a few problems with sound, so please bear with us. Those videos will be able to be viewed off the CCS YouTube channel as well if you are struggling with sound. So just going to bring up my version of the presentation. Everybody see that now?
Yes, thanks.
Brilliant. Okay, so obviously this map is going to show you kind of where Somerset fits from the DEFRA's point of view. These figures that they use were referenced in July 2023. DEFRA concludes that Somerset as a rural area is high pay with medium house prices. And the question that we asked, obviously, it doesn't feel like that in rural Somerset. We know that the challenges to do with pay and house prices is very different on the ground in rural Somerset. And for those people from those parishes, you know, just question yourself, is that how that feels where you live in your parish? Because I'm sure it doesn't feel, you know, it doesn't reflect the map that's coming up there. So moving forwards, again, asking that big question, why do we need more affordable rural housing in Somerset? We know that the area is very attractive for second homes, and there's been a continuing increase in people buying second homes, which is reducing the supply in houses and at the same time pushing house prices up further, which then in return pushes private rent prices up as well because of the supply issue. Also very attractive for retirees relocating into Somerset. Again, steady stream, very attractive, and continues to push the house prices even further. So the scenario really that we're in is we've got higher than national average house values. The income levels are lower, so the ratio then means for many people in rural areas that it just doesn't work. They aren't earning enough to kind of meet the prices that are out there for social housing, for private rented housing and housing that's available in those areas. Also to consider, Somerset's also, like many areas around the country, been very attractive in the sense of people buying under the right to buy scheme. Some properties, well, high numbers of properties have been taken up through right to buy, which has reduced the amount of social housing available. There hasn't been high levels of social housing being built. There is a small pocket of social housing currently being constructed in West Somerset, which is the first for many years, which has again resulted in the stock not being available for social housing purposes. And then remembering that the stock is allocated, what's left is allocated right across the county, which is very little. We know that this video, the sound is going to be low. We will play it. Please, if you can, after the webinar, use the links and we'll try and send them out again. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it on your own machine better than we can hear it here. Not sure why we've got sound problems with Zoom at the moment. But this is Nicola, who will hopefully take you through her experience of affordable housing in Somerset.
My name's Nicola and I live in Norton-Sub-Hamden. I moved into my housing association property in 2014, so 10 years ago. I've lived in Norton-Sub-Hamden since I was 5 years old. My mum and dad live across the road, so I've lived here most of my life. Lovely growing up. My bedroom looked over these fields. When I had my son, I'm a single parent, so, and I wanted to stay in the village, and trying to get a house in the village is impossible. The prices are too high, but I went on to the housing association and on the list and managed to get this house. Took a long time, but yeah, so So with the houses here, you had to meet so many criteria. So you had to be local, work local, or have a strong family connection. So I had all three of those. To work, I think it was 16 hours or more within the area or local area. 10 houses here. 2 of them are part ownership, so there's a 3-bedroom part ownership and a 2-bedroom part ownership, and then there is this one what I'm in, 2-bedroom. Then there's 2 1-bedrooms. They're upside down ones, so the bedrooms are upstairs, living opposite way. Bedrooms downstairs, living upstairs, and then the rest of them are 3-bedroomed. Houses as well, so it went to local people. So if you were from Norton, it went to, we were priority, and then it went out to different villages like Chiselborough, Chinnock. So, and then I think there was Oldcombe, which is not too far away, and Stokes Poundon, even though that's closer, but there's more houses available there. So it went to the smaller villages first. I grew up in the village. My parents lived across the road. My mum still lives there, but my dad's passed away. So yeah, to have family near you to help you if you ever needed it. I worked in the village as well, so to be close to my work, so I don't have to travel anywhere. So it saves the environment as well without travelling. My son went to Norton School. He's now at Stanchester. But yeah, so when I was at work, my mum would look after him before he went to school. So and he went to local play school as well. So
Without that support network,
it wouldn't, yeah, it would have been hard.
be different.
Yeah. Maybe still living with my parents if I couldn't get anywhere else, or otherwise it would be the only things were coming up were like in the towns and things like that. So, which growing up in a village,
You want that?
I want that village and community spirit.
Yeah.
Being near people. Yeah. Fine. I've had no problems with them. It was with Yarlington, which is now it's ACRE, but yeah, they've been brilliant.
Easy.
Yeah, easy. If I need anything, just go online and ask them to come in. Yeah, really easy. No, I think it would be hard because when I first started working at the post office before I got the house, and then the community land trusts, which is involved with the houses as well, if they weren't there to take over the post office and shop, it may have gone. Yeah.
Lost a resource and lost
Yeah.
a member of the community.
Yeah, definitely. I think any rural area should be able to have housing for people that grew up in those villages. I think it's important to keep community spirit and people from the community living in the community instead of having to move away to other places.
So the work that we've been doing to establish the housing need for the project is to go from a top-down approach using Somerset Home Finder, the census data of 2021, which has given us information on demographics, the proportion of people in private rented, social rented, looking at affordability, so cost versus income, and also local plans. So really getting drawn down into the data. Colin's been doing some excellent work in really drilling down into what's going on within the housing need for Somerset. And then looking further, getting at a local level, I'm sure many parishes already understand and get feedback locally about, the shortage of housing in their locality, and use that as great information. There's also a wealth of information out there in terms of neighbourhood plans, community reviews, reviews that have already been done. There's community reviews that are underway at the moment as well that will be asking questions about the need for housing. And on top of that, housing needs surveys. And like I say, just the community knowledge from parish councils and other local groups that can really tell you more about the need in that locality. Home Finder Somerset, all of the council or housing association of homes for rent are advertised on Home Finder. Very interesting if you take some time to look on Home Finder what's currently available. Often there's very little, and it's quite an eye-opener to see what's there or not there. The thing to remember as well, a lot of people unfortunately look at Home Finder, realise that in order to get a property from there, they need to be in one of the highest bands, which is normally gold status, and have a high level of need, which in reality means that they feel that they probably won't ever get anywhere. So they actually don't make an application to Home Finder because they just don't think they're going to get anywhere, or it's just not for me because of the waiting times. So therefore, the figures that we get from Home Finder, as we say, are just the tip of the iceberg. It's not the true reality of the status of really demonstrating the need that's out there in Somerset. And that massive statement there that the waiting list in England has increased by 31% in rural areas just demonstrates the need for affordable housing, which is absolutely paramount to keep people in those communities. So some of the practicalities of establishing need. Housing needs surveys will really inform you. It's anonymous, confidential data. It's going to tell you the need for housing in your locality, the type of properties, how many properties, the size, what's suitable for different ownership needs. And it can also tell you really properties that you've got too many or maybe too large. So where downsizing might be an option that would free up properties. So a key part of the process. I'm going to hand you over to Colin, who's going to take you through to where you can build and options for land. So Colin will now take over the next part of the screen.
And Colin will remember to unmute himself as well. I think that would help, wouldn't it? Right. Hopefully, can you all see that where can you build slide now?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's working. Good. Okay, so as if it isn't obvious, land is key. Thing about land is they're not making any more of it. You know, it's the land is a finite resource, and somehow you need to identify a piece of land that's suitable. Well, what we normally see in a rural setting is what we call a rural exception site. And the advantage of a rural exception site is it's what it says on the tin. It's where planning permission is given in exceptional circumstances. So it's land on which there would never be permission given for speculative market housing. And as a result of there being no permission available for speculative market housing, the value of the land is not residential value. It's what we tend to call existing use value or enhanced agricultural value. And as a result, that helps to keep the cost of providing housing down and keep it affordable. Now, there are at the moment 6 different local plans in Somerset. The council is starting on the process of creating a single local plan, which will replace 5 of them, but we'll still have a separate local plan for the national park. Exmoor is a planning authority in its own right. And some of these local plans describe rural exception sites, and some of these local plans don't quite describe rural exception sites, but the principle of building outside of what I'll call the development limit is pretty much the same across the county, and for that matter across the country. So where can you build? And there are always constraints. And what we normally look at is what we call a sequential test, considering all the possible sites on the edge of the village or on the boundary of the settlement, looking at how they relate to the existing settlement, and considering the pros and cons of each in order to come up with a priority list. And you might do this through what I like to call a walkabout, where members of the parish council, other members of the community, possibly a planning colleague, possibly a rural housing enabler. That could be an enabler from the council, or it could be independent enabler from the community council. But some sort of group of advisors like that will join with villagers to have a walkabout and actually physically look at sites and consider their merits and demerits. And there's a lot of possible constraints, but also possible opportunities. And I've just got a few examples here of, slow worms, dormice, contamination, ground conditions, underground cables, all sorts of things that you might not immediately be aware of, but you need to look at. And for those of you who are a bit more eagle-eyed, you can see on my photograph that this toad crossing sign has actually got hinges on it, which suggests that every now and then someone comes and closes this sign up because the toads only try to cross the road at certain times of the year. And for me, that's a good reminder that some of the surveys that you might have to do for things like bats and dormice, you have to do them at the right time of year. So it's also useful to be aware of the seasonality of some of the things that you might need to investigate. But most of all, you must have a willing landowner. So here's a willing landowner, and I've never ever been doing a webinar before where I've been able to say this photograph is courtesy of the Glastonbury Festival. And apparently the chap at the top's quite famous. I think I've heard of him before, but this is taken from building of affordable homes in Pilton on land donated by Michael Eavis. So when you've looked at all the options and considered the pros and cons of the various sites that may or may not be available on the periphery of your village, then you need to have some sort of consultation on the preferred site and on some initial designs. And that needs to be wider consultation with the whole of the community. And what you will find is that no site is perfect, and any site will have objectors. It doesn't matter how good you think that site is, there will be people who disagree with you. And I think that's another good reason for having considered all the possible sites, so that you can actually present it as, well, this is the best possible available solution. And what you're actually saying is this is the one that's most acceptable, or another way of putting it might be the one with the fewest objections. But I'd like to think of that as the fewest reasonable objections, and not just people who are going to object anyway. How does it work later when you've got the rural exception site built? There'll be something called a Section 106 agreement, which is, if I remember correctly, it's Section 106 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, but don't quote me. That's the part of the Act which planners can impose obligations on an applicant, so in this case, a developer. And in this context, that obligation will be for the lettings to be kept local. Otherwise, you will not get permission to build on that piece of land. So you have to have local lettings or local sales in the case of a discounted market product. And that needs to be in perpetuity, not just for the first generation of people who move in, but for future generations as well. And the way that this normally works is the first lets of any rented properties will be to people with a connection to what I call the target parish. Your housing needs survey, the information you've got from Home Finder and other sources, that should tell you how many houses you need. Usually what we find is you need yay many houses, but you've only got room to build fewer than that. What you shouldn't be doing is building too many. If you've got evidence of 12, you're not going to be building more than 12. You might be lucky and build 8. You might not have the right size site to build more than 8, but you wouldn't be building 13. And so on the first lets, they're going to go to the people who've got a local connection with your target parish. But what you can't have is property standing empty in the future. If one becomes vacant and there's no one at that particular moment in time that needs a property of that size with a correct connection to the target parish, then we go to what we tend to call the donut ring, which is basically it's the adjacent parishes, all of the parishes that surround the target parish. And if we'd been able to hear the video of Nicola from Norton-Southampton, she would have mentioned, and you'll be able to see this if you go onto our YouTube channel, how they were careful about which parishes they went to next. But in the end, it was all of the adjacent parishes, just in a particular order that suited the people of Norton-Southampton in that case. And if there's still nobody at that particular time that needs a property of that size, then you go to the rest of the local authority area. So because of that sort of cascade outwards, we can be sure that a property will never stand empty. And if it never stands empty, then the landlord will always have a rental stream. And if they always have a rental stream, then someone will be willing to lend them the money to be able to build it in the first place. So this has to be in place in order to make the finances work. But it's also a jolly good idea in terms of the social policy objective. So we're now going to find out whether all of our videos don't work. Or whether this one sounds any louder, because hopefully you'll hear from Angela Gascoigne from Shell next.
So hello everybody, my name's Angela Gascoigne and I am Chief Executive at Shell Housing Association. Shell is a small community housing association. We're based in Bridgwater, where we started as a trickle transfer organisation from Sedgemoor District Council 30 years ago. Since then, we've built a number of homes, and we now own and manage about nearly 800 homes across what is the former Sedgemoor District Council, Somerset West and Taunton. We're moving out as well into towards Glastonbury and Street with our new development strategy. I also chair the Rural Housing Alliance for the National Housing Federation, and that is a group that brings together housing associations which own and manage homes in rural communities. And our job at the Rural Housing Alliance is to provide a clear, single, collective voice for lobbying and influencing on rural housing. We meet quarterly and we invite representatives from Homes England and DEFRA, and we're supported by both the Rural Services Network and the National Housing Federation. And we've published or facilitated the publication of a wide range of materials on everything from homelessness to delivery on rural exception sites and the Parish Councillor's Guide to Rural Affordable Housing. So what is the guide? The guide sets out a wide range of information which is useful to parish councillors considering the housing needs of their local areas, and it answers questions from everything such as what is affordable housing and what planning routes are available, to more detailed guidance on rural exception sites and how to deliver affordable rural housing in your area. Anyone can make use of the guide, but it's really useful for parish councillors who want a primer on how to get affordable homes built in their village. There are lots of links in there, even one from a rural housing enabler in Essex talking about her job, so you can find out what Colin actually does. Now, usually you can find this on the Alliance website, but we're having a new one made at the moment. So if you want a copy, please contact me directly, angela@shell.org. It'll be in the chat and I'll get one to you in the meantime. It's a really good read. And I have to thank Jo Lavis for all the work she's done on this, and we're looking to update it as things change too. Any good book, and this is a good book, will raise questions as well as answer them. And this is where Colin comes in. Colin will be able to answer any questions that you might have and give you leads to more resources. I'm just going to put in a quick plug as well for a new rural housing design guide, which is being launched on the Friday of Rural Housing Week. So it's undercovers at the moment, but watch this space as it is a fantastic resource and well worth seeking out. Again, if you want a copy, drop me an email and I'll let you know how you can get hold of one after the publication date. Thank you.
So what Angela would have mentioned is this excellent guide produced by the Rural Housing Alliance, which she is the chair of. The Rural Housing Alliance is a group of organisations concerned with rural housing. There's a surprise. And it's supported by a number of other rural-based groups. And this guide for parish councillors has been produced for many years and has been updated and tweaked along the way. If you go away from this session with nothing else, then go away from this session with the idea of having a dip into this book. We can again send you the links to be able to download it yourselves. And this book is terribly well written and has in places lots of links to other resources such as videos, which hopefully you can hear, and other documents. But she was also going to tell you about this new book, which is the design guide, which was launched during Rural Housing Week about a fortnight ago. Now, I haven't had the chance to look at the design guide yet, so I can't give it the same thorough endorsement that I can for the Parish Councillors Guide, but knowing the provenance of the document, I'm sure that it's very good. So how do you go about it? And again, some other famous person with Michael Eavis this time. Well, the main thing you need is time and enthusiasm. It will take a long time to get from having the idea that you need a rural housing scheme to actually having a rural housing scheme. And that's the key thing to concentrate on. If you don't have the time and the enthusiasm, if there aren't people with the motivation and a bit of tenacity, then it probably won't come about. Normally, there's some sort of steering group, and that could be the entire parish council, or it could be a group of people that includes some parish councillors and some other interested individuals. Or it could be a group of people, none of whom are anything to do with the parish council, but are terribly enthusiastic on the ground. And sometimes that steering group forms a community land trust, and then the community land trust is in the driving seat. It's not obligatory. Sometimes the steering group will work with a housing association, and once the houses are built, just disband. Now, you might have a retired architect or solicitor or planner in your community, and that sort of person is helpful to this group, but I'm going to say they're not necessary. I go back to what you need is time and enthusiasm, because what expertise you don't have in your group can always be bought or brought in. It could be bought in and it could be brought in. And part of our role, I think, is to help you find and identify which expertise you need. Over the years, people working in rural housing have developed this 10-step model, which you can see. I won't read out every stage, but it moves from identifying the fact that you have got a need, looking at finding a suitable site, which we've talked about, and then working with a housing association, and then going through planning and then building. I think the thing to say about this is this is the ideal model, and what we know is that in the real world, things tend to happen in the wrong order. So it doesn't matter terribly if you start at step 3 and work on from there, but it would be helpful if you did have some evidence of need before you had identified a site. So what we can do is help with some of that hard work, and as an independent honest broker, we can help people understand those processes, give impartial advice, explain those options, help navigate planning, and help identify a housing association partner. Now, there are other things that you need to consider, and probably the most important of those is that, which I've already sort of started to touch upon, that if a scheme is going to be affordable housing, it will need subsidy. The nature of the cost of construction is such that without subsidy, the outcome rents will not be affordable, whether you're using the plain English sense of the word or whether you're using the technical definition of affordable, it simply won't be. So one key thing is that grant funding might be available from Homes England or from the local housing authority, or possibly both. Slight caveat in that obviously we're in the days of a new government, not entirely sure exactly what their plans are. And one possibility is that this speak of devolution and giving powers to metro mayors and so on might reduce the role of Homes England in some way. We've already got that in one sense because the predecessor organisation used to cover the whole of England, and for a long time London has been separate and Homes England has only covered the rest of the country. But if such powers are given to the Mayor of Greater Manchester or the Mayor of the West of England, that's not going to help Somerset or Dorset or Devon or Wiltshire or so on. So don't quite know where that's going, but I suspect we will still have Homes England or some similar body into the future. And in order to access that subsidy, you need to be what's known as a registered provider, and that strictly is registered with the regulator of social housing. Now you can create your own registered provider, and that's what some community land trusts do. And it takes time, and there's a lot of bureaucracy to go through, and you have to find, you have to have the right governance in place and the right policies in place to prove to the regulator that you're competent to be a social landlord. So for most people, it's easier to work with an existing registered provider. And in the vast majority of cases, an existing registered provider is what I would call a housing association. And I suspect most people would call them a housing association. At this point, I was going to hand over to Carl.
Hi, I'm Carl Hine. I'm Head of Community Housing at ACRE Group Housing Association. Housing associations are not-for-profit organisations set up to provide affordable homes and support local communities. So ASTA doesn't make a profit for shareholders. We invest the income that we make into delivering on our social purpose. We cover an area really across the whole of the south of England and London now. And we like to think that we're going to continue to expand. So we own and maintain over 36,000 homes across southern England, and we deliver around 1,000 new homes every year on top of that. As part of ASTA's development programme, we deliver community land trust schemes, and that's where my role comes in, heading up the programme of CLT projects. So ASTA's completed 13 partnership CLT projects. We've got 18 more in the pipeline, and almost all of those have been in rural areas. Also, I used to work as a rural housing enabler. That was my first job after graduating university, and I spent 5 years working for the Community Council of the Somerset as an RHE. Really enjoyed that role. It was a great place to work with great people, and I learned a lot about affordable housing. And it was good for my career because I made a lot of contacts at local authorities and within housing associations and local governments, Homes England. So a really good, beneficial experience that I enjoyed a lot. During my time as an RHE, it was evident that housing associations really valued our work as independent brokers. So beyond the housing needs surveys that we undertook and the site selection exercises that we assisted with, it's really that ongoing continuous process of liaising with the community and just making things as easy as possible for housing associations in terms of delivering their projects. Obviously, it's key that you have the support of a community for a rural scheme. with community land trust schemes. That's obviously front and centre, with the community partnering with the housing association to deliver the projects, but also for more standard rural exception site developments, it's really important to have the community on board. You have to deliver what the community wants in terms of the number of homes, the tenure, and the location, which isn't always what would be considered the best location in development terms. The best site's often not the best site in development terms, but the site that's considered the best by the community. And that's probably the site that's got the best chance of success through the planning process. It's probably never been particularly easy to deliver affordable housing in rural areas. Certainly, it's become increasingly difficult. I've certainly seen that over my career, that as time's gone on, it's become more challenging. And I think particularly so in recent years with the pandemic and the inflationary build cost increases we've seen, it's become very difficult to deliver really high quality, sustainable homes for very low rent levels for the end user. So that's a real challenge, making sure that the homes don't cost more to build than they're worth effectively is the biggest challenge. And clearly, when you're operating within such tight constraints, the value of the site is key there, and keeping that value down to recognised rural exception site land values, so an enhanced agricultural value essentially, is really crucial for the viability of the projects. In terms of when a housing association would usually become involved, it really does vary. Almost always after a housing needs survey has been carried out, sometimes immediately after that. So we've been involved with site selection and working with the community to that end. Somewhere where there's more advisory support, we might come in after the site selection process, perhaps even when a pre-application planning pre-app has been undertaken, with planners giving feedback on the merits and constraints of each site, and maybe even where there are basic heads of terms agreed with the landowner. So it does vary. We're currently working with community land trusts across the south of England, including in Somerset, Dorset, Devon, Cornwall, Sussex, Gloucestershire, and elsewhere. So covering quite a range, but working with a lot of different community advisors and rural housing enablers.
Hand over back to Jane, because we're on to panel session.
Okay, so everybody, we've had a lot of information, not quite as much as we were hoping for, because obviously we've missed some of the videos. But as we've said, we'll send those to you so you can listen to those after the event. But if this is a good time to ask any questions you've got of the team, if there's things that weren't clear or you wanted a bit more information about, and you can either put your hand up or put a question in the chat, whatever's good for you, really. But we're really happy to answer any questions you've got about what's been talked about today that's pertinent to where you live and what you're looking at doing in your community.
Forgive me, I'm struggling to find the icon to put a hand up.
That's fine. You carry on, Mike. That's fine.
Yeah, apologies. I was a little late due to what can only be described as user stupidity. So I'm sorry about that. So I have two questions. The first one's just a logistical one, and you probably answered it at the beginning. Will you send us a link to these slides?
Yes, we will. We'll send out the slides. There'll also be the recording will be sent out as well, and we'll send out the links to the videos on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to share that with other people.
Okay, thank you.
Watch it again yourself.
Okay, so my where I have lived for the last 27 years, is in what we used to call an AONB till we spent somebody spent a lot of money renaming them. So question one, are there any additional considerations? And that might be a very long answer, in which case I need to go and find out offline, I suspect. The second one, which is probably more relevant, we have had frankly bizarre experiences with what was Mendip planning. sort of authorized or approval given to things that nobody wanted and everybody objected to, and vice versa. So are the planning authorities aware of and on the side with this? Are they in sync?
I think that's two good questions. I'll hand you to Colin to be able to answer those two for us. Colin.
I'll have a go, but first I want to ask a question, which is, shall I stop sharing this Ask the Panel slide
That's a good
and
idea.
turn it to everyone being able to see each other?
Ooh.
Right. That was a bit of a shock, wasn't it? So Mike, I was going to say thanks for those questions, but that sounds like I've been in the election, doesn't it? Saying thank you for that question. Yeah, but no, thank you for that question. I think the first one about the AONB, which, as you alluded, is now renamed National Landscape. Yes, there are additional considerations in one sense, but in another sense, there aren't really. The principle is the same, which is that in order to build anything, anywhere, you need to comply with the relevant planning policy. And in an area of outstanding natural beauty now called a national landscape, or on the national park, there are additional considerations where obviously there are factors in place to conserve the nature of the let's say treasured landscape, which is perfectly understandable. It doesn't mean to say you can't do it. There's a very good example of the not in Somerset, but I think it's in Dorset, isn't it? Which is the Lyme Regis Community Land Trust, who were able to build a small scheme on a site which was within the AONB, which was about the only site they could find in Lyme Regis that wasn't liable to subside. I nearly said subsidy, but I earlier said you needed subsidy, but not in this sense. Subsidence. So actually finding the right piece of land for them was very difficult. And it's just a matter of, I say it's just a matter, it's a matter of how you mitigate against some of the factors that the various planners will be wanting to preserve. And not just planning colleagues, but of course, other statutory agencies that will be consultees on any planning application. So if you like, the stakes are raised if it's a national landscape, but it isn't impossible. And the principle that you need to find the right balance between meeting the needs of the community and preserving the character of the settlement and the landscape. That principle's the same. It's just a trickier tightrope to walk. In regards to your second question, I think the point is that there is now, well, as I said earlier, there's two because of the national park, but ignoring the national park, there is one planning authority for the whole of Somerset now. So the colleagues who used to work at Mendip and colleagues who used to work at the other three previous districts are all working together in one planning team, and they are starting work on bringing together one new local plan. That will take time. But I know from many years of experience that most planners do actually want us to build affordable housing. The difficulty with planning is always that those counterbalances means that things are tricky, and sometimes you do get what you might feel is a perverse response. I would say to that, that's all the more reason to do lots of community engagement in order to convince the planning officers and then the elected members that your proposal is reasonable. And if your community is entirely behind you, then that carries more weight. It doesn't mean to say that you can take away vital habitats or whatever, but and another issue we've got across Somerset at the moment is phosphate mitigation. There's all sorts of planning issues that we all have to deal with. I think the problem is, and we'll see whether this happens with the new government, I think the problem is there's a perennial thing that people say planning is not working, we need to fix it. And often when people try to fix planning, what they actually do is make it more complicated rather than fix it. So there needs to be some thought given to how that's going to work in the future. And that's another crystal ball. I've probably said far too much. Sorry, I'll stop.
Well, just briefly, I mean, thank you for that. That's helpful. One thing that I like, if you have people's ears to get over, it is very clear from our community that we have a need for affordable housing. And one of the points you made earlier, I think, was if you do not provide the ability for young people to live in their areas, those communities will die. And AONBs, national landscapes, call them what you will, mustn't become museums, kind of sort of set in amber. They need to remain living communities whilst still keeping all those characteristics which make them AONBs, national landscapes, call them what you will. And there is a balance, but there are a lot of very frustrated young people and people with young families who just see their communities slowly dying as they move out because they can't live where they were brought up. Sorry, I've talked too much now, so I'll shut up.
Thank you, Mike. It's very true. I wonder if it's something we're going to pick up after the meeting with Mike to look at their particular situation. Right, I think Denise, you're next. You've got your hand up. You managed to find the hand up function. Well done.
The Wells City Council has a neighbourhood plan now, and we have got in that the reference to the local plan, which had a housing needs assessment for Wells as requiring 40% of affordable housing in new developments. Trying to get that is a difficult thing because we haven't got much land, and what has been earmarked in the local plan as 3 areas haven't yet come up for sale. So I don't know how we can affect those sales because they are privately owned businesses that own them. That's one question, is how do you manage to get land when it's not there for sale? The second question is we had a housing needs survey done in quite a long time ago, and it really should be updated. And how do you go about a new housing needs survey? Do you have to pay somebody to do it?
I think again it's one for you, Colin.
Okay. Well, there are several things in there. The first thing I'd like to say is that you've started to talk about a different sort of site, because earlier when I was talking, I was really concentrating on the rural exception sites, and which might sound strange in the context of a city, but Wells is pretty compact, isn't it? And my memory of it is, I think in order to look for a site outside of the settlement boundary for Wells, you're probably looking in St Cuthbert out rather than Wells itself. But when you've talked about land that's allocated, well, once land is allocated in a local plan or in a neighbourhood plan, once it's allocated for housing, then it has a full market value. And so it makes it difficult for a housing association or local group or community land trust or anyone else, or the council for that matter, to look at purchasing land for social housing, because you're competing with commercial prices. What you've also referred to there was the 40%. So that's the planning obligation that under the old Mendip local plan would have applied to any speculative site in producing a level of affordable housing to meet the overall need. Well, there are 2 things I need to say about that. The first is, yes, it's an allocation for what was the whole district. So we come back to the point that Steve referred to earlier. Supposing that a developer does bring that forward, supposing that 40% of it is handed over to a housing association, when they get to be allocated, they won't necessarily all go to very local people. They'll go to the people in the greatest need, which is, again, absolutely right, that the people in the greatest need get rehoused, but they might not all be, in your case, Wells people. You might be rehousing people who are overcrowded in Shepton Mallet or made homeless in Glastonbury or whatever. So which again, with the rural exception scheme, we're more likely to be able to ring fence the properties for very local people, because it's only a modest, 6 or 8 or 10 properties, not 40% of a significant site. The other point of that is, yes, we also know that such developers often have viability issues. and are able to come back to the planning authority and say this site is no longer viable, you have to reduce the obligations. And then the planning authority has to make a difficult decision about which obligations to reduce, because there might be contributions for highways or education or other social needs across that settlement. Invariably, there is a reduction in the level of affordable housing. So the policy might say 40%, but the outcome might not be 40% for legitimate viability reasons, because it's not cheap. You know, the cost of building has gone up. The inflation rate for materials is greater than, it certainly is now greater than the rate of inflation, because that's come down again. But you know, it's quite high. So it's very difficult for and I think your other point was, yes, you can allocate a site, but you can't force the owner to do anything with it. And I think that does come back to the point I was making on the earlier slide. You need a willing landowner. And I think what you might still be able to do is consider a site outside of the boundaries as like a rural exception site, and put forward the argument that the allocated sites are not coming forward. Whether or not the planners agree with that, whether they accept that as, you know, because they'll have evidence to say the need is going to be met, it's just not going to be met right now. And to be fair, this is another point we haven't come back to a lot. A lot of rural exception schemes will take time. So it's not as if you can snap your fingers and bring that forward as an overnight solution immediately. It will still take a number of years to get from concept to planning permission being granted. And so, you know, to be fair, none of us know if maybe developers will move on those sites in the interim. Maybe they will. I mean, I kind of share doubts about that, but you know, to be fair, we don't really know, do we? I think I've answered. Jane, there was something else about, actually, can I stop there and hand back to you for the question about needs surveys, because I think I need to get some water.
Okay, all right. Well, let's just wait for a moment for Colin to get a drink. It's got a lot of information going out. He's worn his voice out. Just moving on to a different question while Colin can think about the question around housing needs surveys. Maybe just something that it's something we can offer ourselves as an organisation. We can do housing needs surveys for communities and, you know, for parish and town councils. We have done that before. There are others that can do that as well, but it is something we are able to offer as a service, and we can quote to do that work if that's helpful. But some of the previous local authorities did do that as well. Mendip didn't, which is obviously where you are up in Wales, but some of the others did. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to be resolved in the new combined council. But yeah, so that's worth a question of the council, really, what their ability is to do that, and if they've got plans to do that in communities, because they may well have plans to do that in certain places anyway. But if not, we can offer that service.
Jane, can I make a reflection on landowners?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So I'm here representing Bath and Wells Diocese, but I work with Church of England Diocese and all the other denominations across England. And certainly for the Church of England's perspective, the diocese are not looking at small sites in rural areas. They're running large deficits, most of them, and they need to make money on bigger things. And they're a bit like local authorities, not enough money, not enough staff. So they're not looking at this, but what they've said in feedback in terms of how to bring sites forward, how could we get more affordable housing on church land across the country? They said, well, they don't have the time to basically work with the parishes. They don't have the time to look at the sites to see which ones are suitable. So that's the work that obviously you guys are doing in the Rural Housing Enabler Service, and it's the work I'm doing by looking at the maps. I can see what they own as long as it's registered. So if parish councils are keen and want to do something, all we need to do is tie it to the appropriate church land, because the churches are keen to do something, they just don't have the resources themselves. So if we can match it all together, then there's potential opportunities there. But quite a lot of church land isn't registered, so that's I've just been looking at pretty And there's a big site there, and I'm like, oh, could that be church? Because it's just not. You can see it's not registered. So it's not always easy to find, but I'm always happy to look at villages and see if there's anything there.
That's a brilliant offer, Becky. Thank you. And really, yeah, another way of looking at this, really, isn't it? And yeah, that's brilliant.
And Methodist churches, quite a lot of Methodist churches closing, and again, small sites, but if they've got potential, there's things we can do there too.
Excellent. Well, it brings those, those sites were there for community use, but in a different way. So if we can bring them, keep them there, serving their communities, then that's fantastic. Colin, is there anything else for you on the housing needs surveys?
Actually,
Have you muted yourself?
Sorry. Usual IT incompetence. No, I'm just saying, I think you covered it, Jane, because just that something that CCS can do.
We do have a small capacity within this project to do some work, but it is quite really small. So, but we'll be happy to talk to people about how we can help with that going forward. There is also a question. Megan Hunt from Exmoor Young Voices has put a question on the chat because she's got a noisy household, so she's keeping her mic off. Her question, it's similar in a way to what Denise was asking, but it's about advice on how to encourage landowners to come forward. If it's Exmoor Young Voices, clearly working in the national park, so it could be similar issues to Mike has in a protected landscape. So any Harry or Steve or Colin, suggestions on how to encourage landowners to come forward that they can provide some land for that development to happen.
I think Colin knows Exmoor very well, actually. Having been
because my other job is working for the council covering Exmoor, which Megan knows. But yeah, I think there's a slightly different issue with self-builders, because and for other people's benefit, I think in this context it's best to say that someone who is self-building is not necessarily doing it all themselves, but what they are definitely doing is, if you like, commissioning that individual build themselves. And it might be that all of the work is done by contractors, but they're in charge of those contractors. It's not a volume builder that's in charge of those contractors. But it might be they are doing most of the work themselves. And I think we've got a slightly different issue there because it's a form of ownership. And again, it depends on where you are. So in the case of Exmoor, the local plan will only allow self-building to take place if the resultant property is kept as affordable in the sort of planning sense of the word. So although the self-builder will be effectively an owner-occupier at the end of the day, they will only be able to realise a percentage of the value, the open market value of the property, because if it gets sold, it needs to get sold to someone who couldn't afford an open market property. But that won't be the case across the rest of Somerset, where there's no such restriction. There'll be different planning rules applying, and there's generally resistance to people building in what planners would call open countryside. So the opportunity for self-build elsewhere tends to be on plots that have been set aside, and that could be as part of a larger development. So and again, it depends on whether that's been considered at the earlier stage. So taking the example of the 3 sites that you mentioned in Wells, it might have been that planners at that time considered whether any of those ought to be set aside for self-build or not. As to how do you persuade landowners, that's a good question. I think you come back to how willing are they, and not everyone has a Michael Eavis on their doorstep. So you have to find someone who's generally philanthropic. You've got to find someone who agrees with the principle that if you don't build in this village soon, then the community will start to ossify, if I could kind of quickly précis what I think Mike was getting at. If you have local people who agree with that, then they may well be willing to hand over land, but they will be reluctant to hand over that land if they think that someone is going to be making a profit out of it. And that's your basic, philanthropic landowner. So again, it's not necessarily that. I think in the case of Michael Eavis, the land might have been free. I don't actually know. But it's not necessarily a gifted land. It probably is sold at existing use value. So that would be maybe enhanced agricultural value. It might be paddock value. It depends on where it is. So they're not losing out. But also they would probably want to see the rules about the local connection for the allocations and the perpetuity and what the Section 106 agreement are going to say, to be sure that they're not handing land over that somebody else is going to profit from at some point in the future. So that's your kind of philanthropic landowner. I think there's another sort of cohort of landowners who are maybe not philanthropic, but maybe minded to help, but may also be considering their options in the future. And that's where we get to the issue of what we call hope value. And so it doesn't matter if we think that land is never going to get built on, and it doesn't matter if the planners say that land is never going to get built on. They might still believe that one day things will change and they will be able to build on their land and make residential value out of it. And so a landowner who has hope value is probably not a landowner that's going to be of any help. How you persuade people to move sort of from one to the other, to be a sort of a don't mind really, but don't want to give anything away, to a actually enthusiastic want to support the principle of what you're trying to do, well, that might depend on how well you know your local landowners, and how easily they are persuaded of the merits of the scheme. And that does come back to that degree of community engagement at the beginning. The more you can engage the community, the more you'll persuade a wavering landowner to be a philanthropic landowner. So I think it's all in the process. And then there are some more, for want of a better word, corporate landowners who we might want to try to persuade on the grounds of morality as well. So yes, I would include the church. That's a good example of a larger institution that has the ability to do things for the benefit of the community that could be persuaded. And I just wanted to say that I was kind of hoping that Becky earlier would say, yeah, we've got this lovely palace in Wells, you can have that.
That would be rather marvellous, wouldn't it? Okay, thank you. Thanks, Colin. I think a lot of this comes down to good information, doesn't it? If landlords understand the possibility, the benefits of how of affordable rural housing, and that it is in perpetuity for local people, and all of those things, it's going to be easier for them to, because rumours can go around of what this thing is and what it isn't. So it's having really clear information going out at every stage along the way. But that's brilliant. Thank you.
Families can benefit as well, can't they, Colin? I mean, the situation is that if the landowner had a family, then and they needed it, young people coming in, it doesn't exclude them, does it?
No, and the landowner might also be a local business owner that needs to keep people who can afford to live nearby to keep their business going.
Yeah.
So there are other motivations as well. I was just trying to categorize quickly. But yeah.
When we did a housing needs survey on Exmoor a few years ago, that one of the drivers was a local business, because they were struggling to recruit staff because people weren't living local enough. They weren't going to travel to work there, and so that was one of their motivations for that happening, to be able to keep their business going, essentially. And that's going to be the same in many places. So, are there any more questions from anybody?
Can I just add one point as well? If people don't know, there's also quite a lot of free software online for you to be able to see land ownership. I use the Land app. So if you're looking at areas and want to see who owns, you have to pay more to see who owns them, but if you want to just see the boundaries of ownership, it's quite useful.
That would be good. Maybe if you could put that in the chat. I don't know if that's in our resources already, but
thank you.
That would be brilliant. That sounds really useful. Is there any other questions before we finish the panel? Okay, well, the team are available beyond, obviously beyond this webinar. This is just an introduction to what we're doing. So thank you, Becky, for doing that in the chat. But yeah, if you have any questions afterwards, you think, gosh, we should ask that, then do get in touch. But thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. As Jane says, do get in touch, and we'll be sending you the slides and the videos so you can actually hear them this time, and we apologise for that. Yeah, we'll. One of the questions that I wanted to ask is, are you happy for us all to sort of continue to send you emails about this kind of thing, any further resources? Just letting you know what we're up to. I'm sure Becky will be aware of it anyway, but yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Please do.
Brilliant. Well,
Okay, lovely. Well, we are past 8 o'clock, aren't we, Jane? So shall we all? I'll end the session now then, and thank you all for coming. Been really useful, and we look forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.